Hello, everyone. My name is Jason Ross, and I'm the publisher of woodcentral.com.au and the MC for Timber Construct, Australia's largest timber construction conference and exhibition in Melbourne next month. And I'm very happy to be joined today by Nick Milestone from Mercer Mass Timber in Vancouver, Canada. Nick, can you tell us a bit about yourself?
I've been in construction manufacturing now for nearly 4 decades, 39 years to be precise. My journey, especially over the last 3 decades, has been predominantly in structural steelwork, which is engineering, construction, manufacturing. And then in around 2006, migrated into the world of mass timber in the UK market, bringing together mass timber components such as glulam and cross-laminated timber with structural steel. And it's been quite a journey. And that was about listening to what the market wanted in the UK at the time. The retailers, the Tesco's, the Sainsbury's, the Asda's of this world wanted to do more eco-friendly stores, but we were given a hard target, cost versus carbon. So we came up with the hybrid model as a way we could reduce cost, but whilst maintaining carbon neutrality on these projects. And that sort of unleashed this huge opportunity of how we could do more and more hybrid structures, whereby we're not compromising full mass timber frames at a cost, where we can reduce cost but still maintain some form of level of low carbon construction. And then late 2000s, washed upon the UK shores from Europe was cross-laminated timber. And that was a real game changer, whereby we had these full structural steel frames with CLT floor decks, full mass timber residential developments, which we saw in Australia, the Forte, which then came on to be Dalston Lane, and a number of other projects. And then having the opportunity to have worked in Southeast Asia, especially with the Gaia project, which was pretty spectacular, to hopefully this will be the latter end of my career now in North America, which is still relatively pioneering in mass timber and is only 8 years young relative to the rest of the world, but it's gaining incredible traction because we've got resource of the wood and a variety of species, not just limiting to say whitewood spruce from Europe or radiata pine from Australia. You've got southern yellow pine here, you've got whitewood spruce in SPF, you've even got Doug Fir, and then mixed with a large amount of physical of resource in people and good people. And now it's a case of investments in facilities and bringing in all that knowledge and technology from around the world. And why I'm here in Vancouver is because it's a great melting pot, especially for overseas migrants from Europe, from Australia, finding the way here. So it's a really good mix, and it's kind of bringing that knowledge here. We're kind of almost making British Columbia a bit of a Silicon Valley in terms of a knowledge base. And but what we are seeing is a huge demand, especially on the East Coast and the West Coast of the US. And it's a good time to be in mass timber right now, to be in North America.
So, Nick, do you have a sort of a sweet spot with it when it comes to hybrid construction? And can you sort of briefly touch on what hybrid construction actually is for our listener as well?
Yeah, so hybrid construction is about bringing other forms of alternative offsite technologies. And structural steel, whilst it's nothing new and it's been around since the 1960s, really kind of pioneered did structural steel in around mid 90s, when this whole thing called BIM technology, sort of building information modeling, came into its own. And I saw the evolution in and around the mid 90s. And my first BIM project in structural steel was in 1995, whereby we started to use 3D modeling techniques. And the 3D modeling allowed us to produce manufacturing drawings, which then went to the shop floor. This high degree of accuracy of being able to design, manufacture, and install structural steel buildings within a 2 millimeter or a 16th of an inch tolerance was a real game changer, the accuracy. And then when you start bringing in European technologies at the time, such as glulam and then CLT, which went on an identical parallel path, you've got the synergies of both components of, say, structural steel and mass timber going down identical paths, where you've got this same philosophy and ideology of design, manufacture, and install within such tight tolerances. This is why they are symbiotic to each other. This is why you can have a steel frame, CLT floors, or some CLT shear walls, or either mix it with some glulam beams and columns with structural steel. Makes it just an ideal relationship, purely because of the tolerances, because they are both in this pre-manufactured, pre-engineered technology designed for construction. So, using the terminology of DFMA, design for manufacturing and assembly, it's in the same sort of sphere. And this is why mass timber is not a standalone. And this is why it can be easily mixed with other technologies and other technologies that are coming on board, especially here in North America. North America prides itself in timber frame construction and light timber frame, which is great, which can be, say, built to 5 and 6 stories. When you want to go above that and compete with, say, RC frame in a residential or accommodation structure, then we're starting to see even newer technologies more than mass timber, such as light gauge load bearing steel walls, or CFS as it's known here in North America. Again, we can substitute out the concrete floors for CLT. So again, we're finding, shall we say, more routes to market for mass timber, be it on a structural steel frame or a light gauge steel frame. This is where what we're actually doing when you actually stand back and look at it, we're actually removing concrete out the equation. Now, we'll never truly not use concrete. We still need concrete in car parks, parkades, structural cores. But what we can do is we can mix this, well, we can even mix concrete, steel, and mass timber together to bring a very dynamic solution that reduces the construction schedule, say, by 20-25%, which has an ultimate impact on the cost of the whole building by anywhere between sort of 10 and maybe 12%. And it also makes the structure incredibly lighter, which impacts the foundation design, how quick we can get more follow-on sub-trades getting into the buildings quicker. So effectively, the developer or the building owner will realize that asset much sooner. So it gets a quicker return on the investment. And that's just a bit of smart thinking by using very lightweight, dry forms of construction. So it all comes into the whole sort of MMC world of modern methods of construction.
Have you noticed, Nick, over the last 12 to 18 months, a shift in the American market?
Yes, for sure. Definitely. When we saw Europe with the traction of CLT, it kind of started sort of early 2000s, but didn't truly gain traction for maybe about 8 years. So 8 years is like a gestation period. Now, if we timeline that back to, say, maybe 2016, when mass timber was just about taking off, especially in the United States, well, you do simple math, you're 2016 plus 8 years, you're at 2024, and guess what, it's 2024. And now we're starting to see that cycle build up where mass timber, especially CLT, is becoming an acceptable medium for building materials, where people are gaining knowledge, people are getting familiar with it. And now, especially when you see sort of huge landmark developments by certain blue chip clients, then everybody starts to appreciate, well, why can't we have more mass timber? So we're seeing a huge surge in inquiries right now, as we fully anticipated, that 2023, 24, and 25 was always going to be the inflection point of when we're going to see this demand curve become huge. And one of the benefits of North America has been the rollout of the IBC, the International Building Code. Now, that's a federal code which goes across all states. So unlike Europe, which is incredibly fragmented with 28 countries, all with different building regulations, so you have this sort of peaks and troughs around certain pockets of Europe. What you're going to see gradually across North America is a bigger rollout where everybody's accepting the building codes. Okay, there are finite details of jurisdictions of state and city, which tweak it slightly, but nonetheless, it's all got a certain, shall we say, a regular design code, which is spread out across the entire of the US. And I think that's what the dynamic is different. So when you sort of look back and you say, well, Europe started this journey, great, especially when you've got sort of varied building codes. You take that ideology and methodology of build construction, you put it in a market where it's it's federal regulations across all the states, you've actually got potential for a bigger market demand. And I generally believe over the next 10 years is going to be incredibly significant. And I could actually see the US and Canada outperforming Europe in terms of market demand. But again, it's all down to population and demand as well. And if you look at the context of, say, Europe of a billion population, say to 380 million of US and Canada combined, which is just shy of what, it's only 40% of. The fact you've got more regular building codes actually means we could actually generate bigger demand.
Nick, one of the things that I've been amazed over the last year looking at your organization is some of the amazing projects you've been involved with. The New York City connector is a really good example of a project that you guys delivered last year. Is that correct?
Yeah, the Highline Bridge.
And of
Yeah,
course, the Teddy Roosevelt Presidential Library, the first
yeah,
presidential library in history to actually be a timber-rich mass timber design as well, I understand.
yeah, absolutely. And both using different species of materials. So the Highline Bridge is very much a external service class 3 use. Therefore, the species was Alaskan yellow cedar, which is a much more robust and durable material in an external environment. The Teddy Roosevelt project is using FSC source because it's under the Living Building Challenge. But equally, it's using Doug fir for both the glulam and the CLT components. So you've got such a variety of species in North America, combined with the use of, say, southern yellow pine, which we're doing on quite multiple projects, especially in the southern regions and southeast. And then you've got the use of SPF, which is the equivalent of which is spruce pine fir, which is an alternative to whitewood spruce, which you expect from Europe.
And I guess moving forward, you mentioned before that you see massive growth. There was a report that came out last year that looked at the fact that in 2022, just 1% of the building materials in Canada were mass timber. I guess if we move the needle, what sort of impact could that potentially have on supply chains for mass timber?
What you mean, the increase from 1% to maybe 2% and even up to 3%?
Correct.
Yeah, it's like anything, it creates push-pull demand and supply requirements. If I look here in British Columbia, BC Gov has even got its own department of mass timber. It's looking at ways how to stimulate growth more because you've got the resource, you've got the people, you've got the trees. So if I look at Canada specifically, each sort of provincial government is looking at how to stimulate the use of mass timber. What does that create? Well, we need demand. Demand makes investment in a facility sustainable. So, if I look at BC Gov, they would love to see 10 mass timber facilities in the foreseeable future, which is great. But it's like everything, you need the demand to make the investment sustainable. And that's what the balance will create. We've been very fortunate in Mercer. 3 years ago, Mercer acquired the CLT facility in Spokane in Washington State, coupled with June of 2023, the acquisition of the Structurlam, 2 facilities, one in Arkansas and one in British Columbia, which, yes, it's kind of made as the biggest available domestic supply. We need the growth to go from 1% to 2% to 3%, purely because at the moment we're fulfilling the commitments to our facilities, but only on a single shift. So, we do hear stories where there's not enough supply for the demand right now. That's not true. We can up our shifts from 1 shift to 2 shifts to 3 shifts to cope with the demand. If we get to the point where we can sustain 2 shifts, then I no doubt expect we'll be looking at a 4th facility. And that's where the excitement comes from. But right now, there's more than enough supply capacity in North America to fulfill its demand, because there's not just domestic supply, there's European supply as well. And so we need the demand to keep on increasing. So I'm really hopeful we'll go from 1% to 2% to 3%. And because we've got the technologies, we've got the people, we've got an incredible core here in Mercer of knowledge of structural engineers, detailers, project managers, construction site staff. we have that capacity capability now. So we've got a core that we can actually grow on and, and attract the talent, well, to deliver more effectively.
Do you have a globalized workforce as well? Do you draw engineers from around the world?
Yeah, definitely. And I go back to Vancouver again, which is a huge attraction for Europeans, for Australians, especially to come here, and especially when you want, you want young, ambitious staff, especially in engineering and detailing, because that's where the knowledge is. Combined with people of my age as well that can just bring a little bit of wisdom to the party. But equally, we're growing this knowledge base. Equally, we're looking at looking at outsourcing as well. How can we strike a balance between having the knowledge base here in Vancouver to engineer and project manage, but equally, how can we create pockets, regions of, say, structural detailers? And nothing's off the table on where we can find that resource. We can find the resource in Far East, or maybe in Europe, or even in Australia as well, because there's a glut of knowledge there already that's been achieved in Australia, and that's probably the biggest limiting factor of potential growth in the supply chain is having that knowledge in mass timber. We saw the Europeans struggle on a push-pull demand from knowledge base and factory to growing exponentially. And, we've been very fortunate to beg, steal, and borrowed both people and knowledge and technology in order to enable growth. But that will naturally accelerate anyway. You'd say, if we look at the comparisons to our good friends in the steel industry, how that's gone through supply and demand over the last, where are we now, 60, 65 years, how that industry's grown and it's incredibly mature, and the offshoot it creates in the supply chain. Mass timber is almost the next industrial revolution or the next industrial evolution. That's what is going to attract. And we're at a beautiful point because we've got technology on our side. In the essence of BIM, we're going through a period of digital transformation, which will take us to AI, which will actually make us a little bit more smarter and more efficient in what we do. And we're starting to see that in the rollout of some of the software packages, where we're seeing even structural steel software that's out there at the moment that's adapting itself to suit mass timber. But if that actually happens, well, then that opens up to all the structural steel detailers out there in the globe, and there is a lot of them. And you see what I mean? So it's actually naturally evolving at its own pace. We don't have to go out there as lay preachers and push the knowledge of mass timber onto people. It will just naturally grow, and we're in a space which is very exciting, especially for new graduates coming out of universities. We get a lot of attention from people who want to go down this path of mass timber because, well, we're actually, if we can create more demand, that means we'll put pressure on the forestry industry, which is already in oversupply. So as long as we get the wood from legal and sustainable sources, be it FSC, SFI, or PEFC, then we're going to plant more trees. We're actually going to take more carbon out of the atmosphere. We're actually doing good by the planet. And that's not, trying to sound like, that I'm an eco warrior. Far from it. We're just naturally just doing good by this planet, doing what we're doing in mass timber.
It's interesting you say that, Nick. The FAO report last week looked at the 49% increase in timber demand. But what were the devil in the detail was actually the fact that over the last 10 years, sawnwood production and consumption has now actually trumped over firewood. So we're actually adding value to the timber stock as well, which is really important as well.
And we're going to see the market change in the next sort of 18 months, 2 years, because there's been a natural slowdown in the residential space. Because of geopolitical situations, interest rates, elections, everything always plays a part in the sort of the boom and bust of cycles that we go through. We have 10 years of growth and then we slow down a bit and we get the 10 years of growth again. And the next sort of 10 years of growth is, I think, near enough upon us within the next 12 to 18 months. We'll see that residential sector start coming on board. And we're going to see this huge shift change in towards more off-site technologies. Now, that might lend itself not from sort of factory to site to factory to factory. But that will change the dynamic again, where we're going to see more off-site assembly facilities be it in the 3D volumetric or the 2D flat pack space. And they're going to look more towards more lightweight construction. And mass timber really does feed itself well into that space.
Especially that 4 to 10 story sweet spot, right?
Absolutely. So when I go back and again, I look at timber frame, take the UK as a great example. Following the sort of the tragic events of Grenfell Tower, they restricted the use of timber frame down to 3 stories, which is similar to Germany in that respect. What happens? Well, then people start defaulting more back to concrete structures, which is, well, it's just not good for the environment. But now the realization that, say, light gauge steel is kind of taking that place from that 3 to 10 spot, which is great. But it doesn't mean that we have to use concrete in the floors. We could use CLT in the floor construction. So we're actually, and 70% of the volume of any structure is in the floors. So if we can just swap CLT out for concrete, so there you are, you've got a great argument there for a very low carbon story using the right materials in the right place. We're going to see that shift change here coming in the United States, whereby anything above 5 to 10 stories will go probably into light gauge steel because it's an off-site flat pack solution, but we can use CLT in the floor solution. And I think this is where we're going to start becoming a lot smarter and more efficient. And we're going to start looking at build systems and where we can use prefabricated technologies for two reasons. One, we're sort of reducing that demand for labor on the job site. We're kind of moving that labor from the job site into the factories. And that's where we're going to see a big difference. And for me, that's a big win. Not to do people out of a job on the job site, it's the fact that we're going to have a huge impact on health and safety in construction. We're going to have less reliance of people on the job site, which is actually going to reduce the probability of an incident. Now, for anybody who is in that space of putting buildings up, that's our number one priority above cost and schedule is health and safety. Now, if we can sort of mitigate that on the job site and put that resource into factories where you're in a much, much more safe and controlled environment, wow, I mean, that for me is probably a bigger win as trying to reduce the CO2 consumption in the materials that we use in the construction of a project.
Absolutely. Nick, thank you very much for joining us today. And of course, you'll be one of our VIP star presenters at Timber Construct. I understand that you'll be talking about the tall timber boom in the North American market. And we can't wait to see you at Timber Construct.
Brilliant. Thank you, Jason. I appreciate this opportunity.